Hello. Great to see you. Right, we've had our bump. It's lovely to see you out here in my garden. Let me waste no time and show you what's happening out here. Ta-da! The very first Cineraria. It's beautiful. I didn't really realise that Cinerarias started flowering here in May, but they do. It's bright, it's purple, it's lovely, and the whole garden's going to light up with them because look, you can see them everywhere. They make seeds, they make babies, and I like them. And they cover up the ground, and you can see the weeding I haven't done. So yeah, Cineraria are kind of important. What else is happening here? I really need to put some more time in here, but I've been working elsewhere. We still have, look, the fuchsias are looking really thin and weedy. And I have to prune them because they're dropping all their leaves. It's a signal to prune me, please. And the cherry tree, which is the star of the show, is starting to turn. So it's going to be quite spectacular in another week when I get to show you again. Hopefully the weather will behave. And you can see just the first few leaves falling. I love the colours of the leaves. In fact, I love the lushness of the grass, really. Just take a moment to look at the detail of the buttercup foliage and the leaves being moved by it's not wind. It's just beautiful. I love this. It's weedy, yeah, that's chickweed, but honestly, I love the leaves as they turn. And here is the magnolia, and you can see that I pruned it. Look at that. It was a big branch. I had to take it off because there was just no light getting in. So this is the garden. It reveals itself for winter, and everything is going to sleep, which means you can see better. Oh, that was a tui flying by. The things that don't go to sleep, like this beautiful fern, which I really enjoy. And look at all the babies it's got. So it isn't called a hen and chicken fern for nothing. It makes little ones on the fronds that are getting old, and they go down on the ground, and look, you can see one over there behind the trunk that I actually planted, but that's going to turn into a big one later. So that's really cool. So, yeah, this is the garden in fall. This shrub is not actually going to sleep for fall. It is mostly died, and I will have to pull it out because, as you can see, it's very woody and thick in the middle, and most of that is now dead wood. So it's going to have to be replaced with something new, but that is life in a garden. There's the cherry tree again. Now let me turn the camera around and tell you what I've been doing for God of me this morning. It's been really cool. I guess I'm getting into a little bit of a rhythm. I'm starting to trust that I really can download information from the 0 point field, that I can translate it. And I suppose that's something that comes with mileage, because when you keep turning up every week, and every week something wonderful arrives in your awareness, and then you write it and you read it and you think, well, this is really, well, I think this is good. Who knows what anyone else will think, but I think this is good. That's really encouraging. You start to trust the voice in your head. And that's what I'm doing. So, excuse me, just putting this camera thingy. I've got a nice camera stand now, and it really is very nice. And I'm inside in my lounge, getting myself organised, and I'm going to tell you what I wrote about this morning, because it is way cool. And when I wrote in the little blurb, because, you have to write something, when I went to go live, when I wrote about this, I said, well, do you know you're made of God? Did you know that? And did you know that you can access all of the answers and the information and everything that you need? Did you know that? And it's true. And, last week we did, 0 Point Field and I actually downloaded an exercise, a practical thing, this is how you connect with me thing. And if you haven't heard that and you'd like to, it's on my Patreon, and the link is underneath this video. And you can go there and listen to that and actually do it. Because it's a thing that you just, you get yourself in a place where you can be quiet for 15 minutes, because that's about how long it takes. There's a little bit of information beforehand, and then the process itself is about 15 minutes. And you can do that experiment. This experiment is me hearing and feeling inside my own, whatever it is that hears and feels, the 0 point field, God, source, infinite mind, whatever you want to call it, saying, here is a way that you can connect with me. Of course, it's not the only way. Everybody is different, and some people will love this and some people won't. But it's the very first time that we've done that together, the 0 point field and I. And so I'm really curious to know what you feel about it, think about it, whether it worked. And that actually was where we picked up today. Yesterday I noticed myself, I'm getting warm now, feeling a little bit nervous about, what are we going to write? Because we finished that off. I actually had to sit down of an evening and finish it because there wasn't enough time last week, a week ago, to do it. But I finished it and put it up, and I thought, well, God, I hope it's good. But I have to remind myself that this is not me. I mean, I'm just translating. So anyway, we sit down and get organised, and I'm kind of, who is it going to go? And I just calm down. Hi, Tatu bye. Calm myself down, and immediately the 0 point field starts saying, well, how was it? What did you think? Did you try it out? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What was easy for you? What was hard for you? And there's no right answers for these questions. But what is important for you to realise is that I'm in eternity. It's like, we read a book a page at a time, don't we? When, you go from the beginning, you start the beginning, you go to the end. But God, source, infinite mind, whatever word you want to use for that, it's like you pick up the book and you know the whole story in an instant, but you've always known it and you always will know it. You knew the story before it was written, and you know the story forever. And so if you imagine what that's like, being outside of time and space, how can you learn anything? Because learning requires a beginning and an end. It requires not knowing and then having an experience and learning something. And there is this problem, really, that, infinite mind that is eternal, after however long an eternity it is, because there's no time in eternity, might decide that it wants to have a different experience. And so then it says, well, whatever your experience was, that's great, but what you don't realise is that when you have an experience, because you're part of me and I'm part of you, I get to have a new experience. I can't do that because I'm not in a place where I get to choose and go from A to B to C. You are, and we're one. So you think, oh, God doesn't need anything. And when I say God, I just use that word, but what I really mean is God, source, infinite mind, 0 point field, the unified field, whatever you want to call it, because, there is this unified field that connects everything. And I prefer to call it the unified field or the 0 point field, but actually a lot of people, if they understood, that's God, really. And so, the 0 point field, God, source, infinite mind, gains immeasurably from us having experiences. Because it can't have experiences. It is everything in all time, all places, all at once, one great instant. There's no before and after. So that kind of surprised me. It's like, I know this, but to be sitting there and have this come out, was like, oh, of course. Yeah. Wow. Because we're evolving. And then the next mind-blowing thing to me, and I know this, but it's still mind-blowing, is, look, humans are evolving. Humans are having experiences and learning and screwing up and not learning or learning from experience and so on. That's what humans do. But what if the 0 point field is saying, I'm actually just as busy doing the same thing as you, but we're having the experience of evolution at a different scale. And it goes straight from there into something that I've studied and learned about, which is this whole thing of scales of reference. And in the last few weeks, we have taken a little tour of the atom and the proton and the Planck spherical units that make up the protons and all of that stuff. We've taken a tour and realised that there is a pattern, a structure, a fundamental structure of matter and of the universe which shows up. And it shows up in the structure of the proton, and it shows up in the structure of the little Planck spherical units that make up the proton. And if you go close enough to a Planck spherical unit, you find the pattern again, and it keeps repeating. And if you get bigger from the proton, you find that pattern again when you look at galaxies and stars, and when you go the next scale up is the universe, and it's this pattern that repeats, and there are scales. And so the whole thing that the 0 point field is trying to communicate to us, and it does it beautifully step by step, is that, let's say that I'm a proton and you're a PSU. And remember, there's an example that I've talked about before, but we bring it back this time, where if a proton, a proton is this size and a PSU is really, really, really small, but it's very hard for us to think about it. So if you think of a PSU as being the size of a grain of sand, which is pretty tiny, and then the proton, by comparison, if you have those two things in the same scale, the proton is as big as a huge honking great sphere, where one side of the sphere, like a basketball, one side of that huge great basketball is touching planet Earth, and the other side of it is touching a star, one of the closest stars to the Earth, which is called Alpha Centauri. And it's about 4.365 or whatever it is light years from here. So it's a honking great huge proton and a teeny tiny PSU that's the size of a grain of sand. And the unified field explained, okay, so if the grain of sand is you, and I'm like the proton, how hard do you think it is for the grain of sand to be even aware of the proton? I mean, people think about things that are happening at people's scale. We think about other people. We think about houses and buildings and projects and families and all that stuff. That's all happening where we are. But if you liken us to grains of sand, then God is like this huge great thing that reaches from planet Earth to Alpha Centauri, and it's really hard for us to think about that as something that we can actually have a connection and a conversation with. And I'm not talking about religion, not at all, because I like physics. It gets very spiritual, but I don't do religion anymore. I did once upon a time, and then I sort of evolved out of that, and that was my journey. And if you follow a faith, great. Don't let me mess with that. So there's a scale of reference, and it shows up, and it's in our universe, and I like that because it gives me something tangible that I can actually hang on to and explain about. And the other amazing thing, I've talked about the fact that we have this pattern, this scaling factor, which is what the physicists have found. There's a scaling factor that kind of structures our universe. You can see the scaling factor happening at the Planck spherical unit, which is that grain of sand. And then the next scaling factor, when you apply that, it gets to the proton, which this is the size from here to Alpha Centauri, which, you can just about think about. And, of course, that Alpha here to Alpha Centauri is actually a proton, which is really, really tiny. But, and the PSU is even smaller than that. But the next scaling factor, if you think of a proton, which is teeny, tiny, the next scaling factor from there is happening at the level of stars and galaxies. There's a huge difference between iterations of the scaling factor. This is enormous. And then the next one after that, from galaxies and stars, is the whole freaking universe. Massive difference in scale. But this is what the scaling factor does, is it repeats the pattern, and it's a fractal. And fractals don't stop, which means that pattern must keep repeating beyond our universe at stupendous scales that we can't possibly imagine. I mean, really, it's insane. But this is the structure of everything. And the thought that the 0 point field dropped into my awarenesses. Okay, so if you're like a little tiny grain of sand and I'm like this huge thing that's as big as from Earth to Alpha Centauri. Actually, the difference in size is bigger, but that'll do, because it is bigger, but it'll do. Then what if, we haven't actually got about to writing this, but what if my proton, right, which is that big to you as the grain of sand, is like the grain of sand in some other huge proton? And I'm just doing what you're doing, but at a bigger scale. And it's mind-bending. and kind of, oh my God, really? Are we the same? Because we're made of the same stuff, right? The whole universe is made of the same fundamental energy. This is made of the same energy as every proton. And all the energy in the universe that's not protons, which is 96% of it, is still the same stuff. It's just not organized. And so, what if it's, how can we possibly say that we're any different from God, source, zero-point field, unity, oneness, wholeness, infinite mind, when we're all made of the same stuff? And maybe God, source, blah, 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 is just doing the same thing we are at a different scale. And that to me is just crazy. So when I write we're made of God, I'm speaking quite literally. It's the same stuff. And oneness evolving, right? It's the only reason I chose that name is because it's an accurate description of what we are all doing. And I'm no different from you or anybody. So it's an amazing thing. And then to think about this, all right, okay, fine. How do I get to access all the information that's there? Because if you think about God, source, oneness, wholeness, infinite mind, even just as the universe, right? Let's say that all of the information that's in the universe, past, present, this planet, other planets, other civilizations, whatever you think about all of that, even if it's just the sum total of what humanity has experienced and however long we've been doing stuff and however long we will be doing stuff, right, into the future. All of that is contained within this universe, never mind anything else. And the thing about it is that most of us think, well, I don't know. I need answers for my life and I can't figure this out. And, we're thinking and we're looking and we're seeking for answers and we ask our friends and we go and see people and we're left looking for answers. What I've learned from my study, and actually if you've been following this, you will perhaps already intuitively know, but now I'm going to point it out. This pattern that informs the structure of all our matter in our lives and everything, this pattern, when it's visually represented, one of the ways that you can look at it and see it, and it's been done by Nassim Haramein, from whom I have learned a great deal and who is still unpacking the actual maths and the physics that supports me to even say this. It's this enormous flower of life. You look at a proton, if you understand its structure, and this is what the zero-point field was explaining this morning, you will see that it's a flower of life. So you have all these overlapping spheres, and they make that lovely hexagonal pattern, and there's all these curves, and then there are lines through the middle of it. And it's like, well, okay, the spheres are the curves, but what are the lines? So it turns out, and of course there are people who will argue because there's theories, but again, I am following this model of the universe because it makes sense to me. Hi, Robin! And back in 2014, I found an old Nassim video. It was really cool, just a little short one. Back in 2014, Nassim had already worked out that the fundamental structure of every little rotating particle, the protons and the PSUs and everything else, you know what it is? It's a Merkaba. The tetrahedron, the three-pointed pyramid, and there's one pointing up and there's one pointing down, and this is cool little animation. It's amazing. And the maths shows it out. And, 11 years later, he's got much more of the fundamental structure of how this all fits together worked out than he did back then. But what you get is, you imagine a sphere with a tetrahedral pyramid in it, tetrahedron in it, and another one, and they go together so that the tetrahedrons intersect and you get the Merkaba. But the little spheres do this. And so it's like the toroids, they're actually toroids that contain these tetrahedrons, and they squash to become like half of a circle, but it's the spinning thing. And both of the halves are spinning, one pointing up, the other pointing down. They both spin in the same direction. They're perfectly matched. And through the middle of them, there's like a tornado coming down this way and a tornado going up this way, and they meet in the middle. So you have this double vortex, right? Because the whole thing is spinning. So, of course, you've got a vortex. You got spin, you've got a vortex. And there's two of them, one in, one out. Although, which one's in and which one's out doesn't matter. It's a passageway through the middle of this spinning thing. And so we describe this because this is recognized that this is the structure of protons. And then, this is a little imagination too, because of course nobody's actually seen a proton with their eyes. But there it is. And, you have this thing that goes right through the middle of it. And hey, hang on a minute, what was that? Because remember, we're looking at one little spinning thing. Could be a proton, could be a PSU. They look the same if you just get close enough. And we're in the middle of this huge flower of life, which is made of all of these the same. It's this double toroidal sphere thing that's spinning, and it's got a wormhole through the middle. There, I said the word. And this thing is spinning, and all the other ones are spinning, and it's huge, and there's, uncountable numbers of them. And the one you're looking at, suddenly there's this flash of light that comes out from the middle of it. Boom! And it's gone out the top and out the bottom, or one or the other, or both, it doesn't matter. The light is boom! Hang on, what happened? And in the same instant, you observe that every other single little spinning piece of energy that's in this pattern that you are observing lights up with the same flash, and it's instant. There is no delay. And you think, what the hell just happened? What happened was, remember, these are grains of sand inside a thing that goes from here to Alpha Centauri. And they all, boom, in an instant. And light's not fast enough to do that. Light would take 4.3 years to get from here to there. So how did that happen? How did that information be transmitted through the whole thing in one instant? That's the question. And there's maths to support that, to show that it happens like this. And the point is that this one sphere that has a little double vortex going through it, and we haven't actually said the wormhole thing later, because we'll talk about that another time. It's a double vortex, and yes, it's a wormhole. All of the other little tiny bits of, grain of sand size spinning thingies, double vortex thingies that are in that huge thing from here to Alpha Centauri, they all have the same double vortex, and they're all connected. And information travels from one of those things to all of them in an instant. Again, this is maths, this is science. I'm not saying philosophy, I'm saying the mathematics supports this as actually what happens. And if you just think for a moment about how this universe, which is way, way bigger than from here to Alpha Centauri, can actually function. Information has to travel from one side of the universe to the other faster than the speed of light, or the whole thing would fall to pieces. Light's too slow. The universe wouldn't be able to work. And there is supraluminal communication happening inside the proton. It's another story. But this is how it works, and this is why I know that this is actually the truth. If you can get connected to the information in one little piece of the universe, if you can get connected to that one little piece, you are connected to all of it, because The connection's already there. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to make a connection. You just have to figure out how to access it. And the information is... And I know this personally because I use this connection. And I'm really curious to see how the 0 point field teaches this connection and whether we get to the point that we can teach it to other people. That's what this is all about. Because if I as a human being, if you as a human being can, one, access all the information that we need, then we become more self-reliant about how our bodies are functioning and how our lives work and, you know, which way to go and what's my purpose and all that stuff. You can actually access that, where before you were just limited to what you could, you know, what's in my head? I don't have an answer in my head. But you have access to all of the information in the universe. If you just realize, if you just work out, learn, because it's a skill and you can learn it, because if I did, anyone can. You can access that information and you can ask your questions and you can get answers. And I'm even finding that I'm changing my body. So it's one thing to be sort of scratching my head and thinking, I think I'm onto something that works here. And remember that this stands on the shoulders of everything that I've learned and daily practice from Dr. Joe Dispenza, and everything that I continue to learn from Nassim Haramein, and I haven't stopped learning from Joe either. I will continue learning from both of these people as long as I'm in this body. That's the foundation. It's the knowledge, it's the understanding. But the skills and a basic understanding of how it works, I think anybody can do that. And so I'm really curious to see how this evolves. Thanks for listening. I'd love to see you on Patreon. If you want to hear me read this, what I've written today, then you can just follow me for free. And in a couple of days, I will put that up on my Patreon, and I would love to know what you think. And if you're curious, try out the game, the experiment, the journey that we did last week, because, well, again, I'd love to know what you think. Big love. I'll see you next week with more. Bye-bye.